Hello and welcome to this presentation about graphical user interfaces or GUIs. Our learning intentions, once I can get across here, are that students can explain what a GUI is and what the most common elements are used for. So a GUI, which you've probably been, if you're a high school student, you've been using GUIs your whole life. If you're my age, I'm 55, you've probably been using GUIs since about at least the 1980s. If you're a really hardcore nerd, maybe you held out until the 90s. But what's the definition of one? Well, it's a visual method of interaction between users and digital devices using graphical icons, buttons, windows, and other visual indicators. So it's kind of modelled on the physical world, and you interact with it with things called affordances. So I think it's helpful to understand what came before GUIs. The first GUI that I'm aware of is 1973 by Xerox PARC, who made it. Apple then licensed that. I think it first turned up in a program computer called the Lisa, and then the Macintosh in 1984, and then Windows picked it up as well. These days, lots of Linux has a GUI. Goodness, almost everything has a GUI these days. If you pay for something at the petrol station, you're using a GUI. They are the sort of most common interface these days. But the command line came first, and people still use command lines to this day. So the command line is text-based interaction. It requires precise command syntax, so you can't kind of just click on something and see what it does, but you can start off with a handful of things, like there's 2 or 3 that I remember: CD for change directory, LS for list. When I've had to use it, you actually pick it up reasonably quickly, but you can't just sit there and click away at it. If you know what you're doing, it's very direct and efficient. You can get it to do something which would take 5 or 10 clicks in just one line of text if you know how to write that command. It's typically faster for complex operations. And the reason why they came before GUIs is GUIs actually are quite processor intensive. These days processing is so cheap that it doesn't really matter. But pre-1980s, it was just prohibitively expensive in terms of processing power to boss around pixels on the screen. I think that the very first Macintoshes had something like 30,000 pixels on the screen. And if you think of how long it would take you to turn over 30,000 cards, it's quite a big task. If you think of each of those pixels in those days could only be black or white. And of course, it makes you feel like a hacker or a real programmer if you're using a CLI. You can see them these days in a Unix or a Linux terminal. You can see it in Mac OS, which is in fact a Unix system. You can see it in the Windows command prompt, which is where lots of people, I have people to this day in classes who want to do everything in the prompt. PowerShell is just a more modern name for the command prompt. I'm actually not sure how it's different. And developer consoles, such as the console in your web browser, is a command line interface. So it still exists. I would say most people don't experience it. I would say, however, if you are using it in a movie, then there is a 93% chance that you are a hacker and a 7% chance that you are in space. I love that it actually says this statistic is a fictional representation. Yes, it's not literally true, but I feel like it's emotionally true. So what's a graphical user interface? Well, that there is the graphical user interface from the first Mac in 1984. And you can still see the elements that we would recognise. You've got your menus up the top, which we understand that when we click on, they'll drop down. We've got documents there with their little folded corner. We've got a program there. We've got a folder there. We've got disks there, we've got the rubbish bin there, we've got a window that we understand we could click and move it around. I think in those days when you clicked on that thing there, it closed the window. We have scroll bars. So a lot of the elements that we're really used to now have been around since, I guess, the 1970s, although not in common usage. So it's a visual representation of functions. You point and you click. Now, it's a little bit more complicated than that because you can drag and you can double click, but it is the underlying principle of that is point and click. It uses icons, menus and windows are the kind of underlying units of meaning. And, well, we say intuitive, it's reasonably intuitive in that you can pick something up from here and move it to there. it's certainly more intuitive than a command line interface. And it's accessible to users with minimal technical knowledge. Most people, and not all people, but most people can get the hang of something like this reasonably quickly. Our core components are icons. So we've got one for a folder there. Actually, they're both for folders. Your recycling bin, a dialog box that you have to answer one way or another, buttons, cursors, scroll bars, windows, menus. There's lots and lots of other finer points, but that's the basics of it. So, yep, that's those. So, affordances. Now, what an affordance is something that we look at and we can intuit its meaning by what it looks like. An affordance will often represent a real world object. So, I would ask you if you're in class to name me an affordance and what it does, but let's just skip straight ahead and look at 10 common affordances. Buttons generally do something. They'll perform a calculation, they'll put your order in. You understand that if you press a button, something happens. Sometimes people will misuse these for navigation, but generally speaking, they're for an action. Your link there, although most links are not blue and underlined these days, we understand that a link takes us somewhere else. We understand that an icon represents a particular action, that's probably search, that's probably throw it in the rubbish, or show me what's in the rubbish, that's the settings. I think that one's a little bit more cryptic. I think you have to learn that. I don't think if you just if you plucked them out of the 1970s and showed a computer, I don't think they would just go, oh yeah, that must be the settings. But you know what, we've all been using computers for a long time now. An input field suggests that you can type in it. A drop-down menu suggests that you can pick one item. Sliders tend to make things bigger and smaller or adjust a value. We understand that we can tab through have different tabs open to have different mini windows. Selection controls, that is called a radio button. I love how in this example they're both monthly. A radio button incidentally can only hold one value. If I were to click on that one should go off. A checkbox, you can actually check all of them at once. Generally, we can grab something by the title bar up here and move it, and that they have clues when you hold over them. That's not all affordances. You would be surprised by how many affordances you know and understand. So, before I finish up, let's have a look at the types of affordances. So, there are the explicit ones that are just like, hey, this is what I do. There are hidden or implicit affordances that aren't actually there, but we kind of know from experience that they're probably there. That, maybe you can click on the image to see the zoom. Maybe you click on the hamburger. In fact, a hamburger, when you click on it, that should expand to be a menu. They're things that we just learn. They call them pattern affordances. So we wouldn't necessarily immediately intuit them, but when we get to be an experienced user, we think, oh yeah, an underlined thing is normally a link, even though that doesn't represent anything in the world like a metaphorical affordance does. That's a message, that's a rubbish bin. I love that we're still using floppy disks to save. I would say most people in school these days have never used a floppy disk in their life, and you haven't missed a thing. They're hideous. Negative affordances are things that tell us what we can't do, like when things are greyed out. And false affordances are when we use an affordance in a way that is not its common usage, and so we're confusing the user by doing it. And that's very, I think, politely called a false affordance. I would say you're using an affordance wrong. So anyhow, that's a bit of an introduction to what a GUI is, what a command line interface is, and what affordances are.